my story, we'll go back to the beginning on day one. I was born in Washington, D.C. My dad was stationed in NSA when I was a kid. My mom was a single mom. And we kind of floated back and forth. My dad spent a lot of time overseas, and kind of left to dive off into stuff myself. I'm going to sit down, if that's okay. Okay. So, growing up as a kid, my dad would always bring home trinkets, electronic trinkets, toys, computers, whatever, when he would stop by. So, I wasn't interested in how things work. I was interested in how they didn't work. I wanted to take things apart. I had a little professor calculator. I don't know if anybody remembers those. I spent 2 weeks trying to take that thing apart. Once I got it apart, I realized that if you short certain parts of the board out, it made funny noises. I was a little kid. And so I was so proud of myself walking around with that calculator. I thought it was really cool. Fast forwarding through most of my childhood, as a teenager, I wasn't challenged very much in school. Got really bored. Barely graduated, barely. When I say barely, I'm talking like 1 point from not graduating. And most of it was because I wasn't challenged. I spent most of my time playing on Commodore 64s, Nintendos, trying to take things apart, just being mischievous. And that kind of led into where I am in cybersecurity. So I didn't start out on the good side of cybersecurity. I started out on the bad side. Going to RC channels, causing net splits. I'm sure some of you guys know what net splits are. Creating bots, and just terrorizing people, basically. There were a few remote access tools that were leaked to the internet from major computer companies that were used to help people fix their computers remotely, and it would, an analyst would access that tool across the internet and help them with whatever they needed. Well, we got a hold of some of those rats, some of those remote access tools, and used them for purposes that probably they weren't meant for. Deleting files, posting people's photos that they had hidden on their machines, just basically being an internet troll. And as things progressed, I started learning that, the operating system itself, it was full of treasures. I mean, there was things to be had. There was ways to get in. And perseverance it was a challenge, and that's what I needed, was a challenge. And so that's what I did. Starting with, learning how to use Nmap as a kid, to actually, once social media came out, it became a different game. Find somebody that, we had a beef with, or the crew I was with, were targeting. We would take everything we knew about that person, cross-correlate from social media to what is now LinkedIn, anything we could find on that person, and know their entire life. And with a few keystrokes, change everything for them. We compromised some major corporations. Some of the operations I have intimate knowledge of. Won't go into that, but we caused a lot of people a lot of money loss, a lot of loss. And I decided at some point it's time to, try to clean things up a little bit. I'll try to walk the good walk. And I listed the military. And they had crypto tech, which is basically intelligence for the Navy. With that, I learned how to break codes. I learned how to intercept signals. I advanced that already pretty polished hacking skill to a different level. Got out of the military shortly after 9/11 and became quickly disenfranchised with the way the government was working, the way things were being handled, some of the things that they were doing to some people that I'm pretty familiar with and close to. And so we got together and started the collective. The collective became a huge movement. A lot of people ended up losing their freedom over it. I've had friends that have spent multiple months, sometimes multiple years in federal prison for it. And it grew very, very fast. And it became something that we didn't foresee it coming. It's not something that we expected. We were trying to even the playing field with big corporations and with government. And it became sometimes physically violent, to the point where there were riots, and people from Anonymous would be involved in these physical confrontations. And so I made a separation. Before the separation, I had gotten involved with several foreign crews. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with APT-1, APT-28, SOFA-C. I became embedded pretty deep with SOFA-C at some point. They were targeting critical infrastructure, very specific critical infrastructure, controllers for nuclear power plants that could have caused mass amounts of damage. So at that point, the FBI and the Secret Service were looking at those groups. They became pretty hot on their radar. So they started doing intelligence gathering on them. A few of the other APT groups I had crossed on the wire, had started getting involved with them, looking at some of the exploits, some of the 0 days, reviewing some of the malware that they were creating for attacks on the infrastructure. At another point during this process, I had a knock on the door, it was not a good knock. It was one of those knocks that makes your hair on the back of your neck stand up. Very bold, strong knock. And I opened the door, and it happened to be law enforcement. They kind of gave me the option of, you can either help us out, and we'll give you some change for it, or you can help us out. So I didn't really have much of an option. I went into doing intelligence, pretty much confidential informant for foreign groups for a federal agency. And this went on for a while. It's a very scary process when you sit in a room full of lawyers and very high brass as far as law enforcement goes. And you know that at any point they could pull that agreement and you'd end up in prison, basically. So I worked through that. Between these times of getting involved with APTs and creating malware and working on code, I did hold jobs with major financial institutions, government contractors, and the darker side, I lived one life during the day, made a good living, supported my family, and then on my free time, I was involved in a completely different world. And that's kind of the reason for the talk tonight, is that world is real. The people that you try to defend against, some of them, that's their full-time job. Some of them are employed by the military, by the government, and that is truly their full-time job. And then there's other factions that are involved, like Anonymous. They're not as strong as they used to be. Their crew's kind of fallen apart now. But their threat, everybody out there that has ill intent against the network are truly a real threat. And to bring that full circle, working through these financial institutions, working for the government, I've gotten to see the ins and outs of why companies fail. And really, it's not a technology problem. It's a people problem, all the way across the board. Your network is only as strong as the weakest educated individual in your company. And unfortunately, that is quite a few people. The social engineering part of it is a very valid attack. And that's what opens the door to the networks for us. Once we're in, we could be in, I think the statistic right now is 210 days that we're in your network before you even know. Once you find out, it still takes you at least 6 months to get us out. So think about that, 210 days. Think of how much data you're losing, how much IP you're losing daily. And then you have the nation state threats that they want data, they want intelligence. And to think that foreign countries are the only ones that actually do this, think about Russia, China, they're not the only ones who do this. The United States does it. We have intelligence groups. I was part of one of the first cyber war ratings in the military, and we did on nation state level. So it's a chess game, it's back and forth. But through all this advancement and polishing of code and finding new tools, don't think those tools don't get leaked to the people who really don't need them, that want to cause harm. That happens daily. And the same thing with the CIA. They didn't release on purpose, but they had tools that were released to shadow brokers. And those tools are pretty lethal. And that was tools that we used against other countries and sometimes against our own country. There is no limitation of privacy, especially in a big business. Once you log onto that network, the expectation of privacy goes away. The same as you're monitoring your own network, there's people in that network that could be bad actors or bad insiders that are watching you. They're tracking every step you make, and they're probably dropping kits on different machines. So the threat of cyber attack internally is also real. It's not just external actors. I could go on for hours about what it's like in the underground, what it's like in some of these APT groups. But I'll sum it up by saying being in that environment, it creates a level of paranoia because you don't know who to trust, you don't know how to trust them when you first get in. A lot of it is proven by technical prowess, it's proven by constant communication. We have to always dodge government plants that are put into these groups, just like I was with APT 28. But even on a personal level, that paranoia kind of bleeds over into your personal life, especially with companies, with other people. But that's the environment that I come from. It breeds paranoia. So it takes me a long time to get, trusting with people. Speaking here tonight is a little different for me because I'm usually speaking in front of like-minded, hackers or groups that are interested in hacking. To sit in front of people who are obviously here to help defend their networks or learn more about cybersecurity is a little different for me, especially after coming out of Anonymous and some other groups that are disliked to a very large level. It's kind of unnerving. But, one thing that I wish that people would take away, hacking is not new. This goes all the way back to the railroads in the United States. Before the railroads were around, people would go into a bank and rob a bank. They may be able to get 2 banks a day, maybe. Once the railroads were invented, now they have the capability of getting on that train and robbing 300 people a day. And that's basically what the internet created. It created that environment, that fire hose where I don't have to rob a house. I can get on the internet and rob 1 million people. And that's exactly what's going on. So the biggest thing is education. If you can just educate your people, bring them up to speed, and make it a routine, make it constant. Because like I said, the weakest link in the whole cybersecurity chain is the person sitting behind a computer. It's not the computer. New vulnerabilities come out every day. New advanced techniques for hacking come out constantly. Iran just got hit with another version of Stuxnet just recently, which is supposed to be even worse than the previous one. They're being very hush-hush about it, but I bet you can guess where it came from and who created it. But that's it. I mean, that's my life in a nutshell. I run a SOC for cybersecurity. I think it's really important that people who work in cybersecurity know not only the defense and the attacks, but they can see the attacks. They can recreate them themselves and actually perform the attack. That way they understand what they're seeing on these alerts from various different vendors and millions of applications that all pretty much say the same thing. So, I mean, that's how I train my people. I show them what the attack looks like, show them what the security system does show or doesn't show. A lot of the time it doesn't show the attack. And I work with vendors, security vendors, to help them beef up their products, help them track the exploits that I've created. And that's kind of a personal plight for me, helping out security where I may have taken away from at some point. That's about it. I appreciate being invited to speak, and since we have so many people, we can open it up for questions.